I just hit the recording button. All right, so let's get the show started. So good afternoon, everybody from all around the world. We have our audience back today at another Crypto Wednesday show. I think this is show number 11, and we are really excited on today's guest, which we'll introduce in a bit. We would like to welcome all the people from US, which is, let's say, really early for them. We will hear about it a little bit later. All the people from Europe and also the people from Asia looking into the live show. So happy to see you in the show again. And for all those people that are watching the recording, thank you for watching the recording and also sharing that in your communities. Really appreciate that. And maybe to kick off some ground rules, if there's anybody who's watching the live stream and wants to pop up a question, please do so in the chat box so we can moderate that and hand over the questions to Miko, to our guest speaker today, so we can address that. During the show, we will also get some of our alumni speakers, our previous speakers in the show, interacting with me, Gordon, and of course our special guest, which is Miko today. So we look forward to that part of the show also. But like I said, any questions that the audience might have, please put it in the chat box and please keep the cameras off so we have optimal sound and visual system with our guest of today. So before I kick off and hand over to my friend Gordon, just for the people that don't know me, my name is Sander de Bruin. I'm based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've been in the crypto industry for about 4 years or so, and I'm happy to took the initiative together with my friend Gordon to build this Crypto Wednesday community, where every week we are hosting a live Crypto Wednesday show, and we are inviting our crypto and blockchain and DeFi friends from all around the world to share what they're working on, to share latest insights, to share whatever we can share to contribute back to the industry. And we're happy to took the initiative for that. Together with Gordon, we have got some very exciting speakers that were already in the show. And we're very excited also for today's show because we have Miko on the show, and we're happy to have Miko on the show, spending some time with us. But before we hand over to Miko, maybe Gordon, I see that it's still dark with you, so you must be still in LA, right?
Yeah, I think for the moment I'm in LA. I desperately want to, people are beginning to do conferences again in all my favorite places. Mm-hmm. And my favorite place, Kiev, is having one next week. But yeah, I'm in Los Angeles. And as I usually comment, right now it's dark outside. You can see it's dark, but as the show progresses, I'll get bathed in the dawn, the glow of the dawn. So by the end of the show, it'll be bright. Just real quick, I'm an attorney who specializes in crypto and blockchain, but it's not the Gordon show, it's the guest show. So I want to introduce my friend, Miko Matsumura, if I'm saying this all correctly. I just call him Miko. I've known Miko for years. He's been on sort of the international, sounds fancy, speaker circuit with me. And he's always struck me as, a lot of people in this business are sort of very smart and very aggressive and all that other good stuff, but Miko is all that plus affable, communicative, open. He's just a generally good guy, and so he's got a lot of friends. He's got a lot of connections. He's got a good way about himself. He has a good way of expressing himself. He's a busy dude, so I don't know if we're gonna go for the full 2 hours today, but we're gonna get as much of him as we can. And Miko, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm happy to see your smiling face, and you're on my same time zone, aren't you?
Yes, that's right. I'm coming to you from Silicon Valley, so I'm pretty nearby, I guess.
Yeah, well, compared to our audience, you're nearby. I mean, I think we're going to span. Xavier Hawk, one of our alumni speakers, is joining in right now. He's East Coast. Dogo Bras, he's somewhere. No, I think he's in Portugal. No, I can't remember. Hold on. Mr. Bras, do me a favor. In the chat, put your location. And Olga, are you in Moscow right now? Yep, that's right, Dogo. He's in Portugal. So there you go. He and Sandra were bantering about that last time. Senator, do we handle all the preliminaries? Should we jump in or?
No, I think we can get started right away. So maybe it's good to hear a little bit more about Nico's background. So before we go to the future and what we're presently working on, I know that the audience is always curious on, whatever happened in the past. Maybe Miko can share a little bit on that part of his life, if I put it in that way.
Miko, tell us about yourself.
Oh yeah, so I guess best way to put it would be, it's really been a long kind of twisty journey, right? So, I think if you go back to my academic roots, I actually studied neuroscience. So, my neuroscience study was mostly focused on computational modeling, abstract neural networks, and so in a way, the most linear way you could think about an academic background like that is, maybe moving towards AI and things of that nature, so but life never really takes you the way that you always expect. Things are very dynamic and they change a lot. And I definitely took a left turn and ended up here in Silicon Valley, and really started focusing on blockchain technology. There's a lot of twisty passages in there, but I just thought I would let you guys maybe poke and prod and figure out the
Well,
areas.
actually, let's give us those twisty passages. So I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we do this with every guest. Where were you born? Did you say?
Yeah, I was actually born in Madison, Wisconsin, which
Nice.
is
Okay.
in the in the Midwestern United States. So really, it's very different there from California. Largest industry there is the dairy industry. So there's quite a lot of farming and agriculture. It's a different scene from California for sure. California has plenty of dairy industry as well, but I think that they have other industries too.
Yeah, rumor has it. Yeah, good point. And how did you get involved in? Did I hear that correctly? Neurology? Or
Neuroscience, which is sort of a cross-disciplinary study of
neuroscience?
the brain. So I've always been really interested in human behavior, and in some ways, I guess you could think of me as a philosophical guy. So because of that interest, I was always really interested to kind of study that. It was kind of in some ways it was kind of either that or physics. So I feel like people with my temperament tend to head off in one of those two broad directions, which is sort of either trying to understand like what the universe is or what the individuals are, and I think given sort of I have an introverted temperament, and so I tend to think about a lot about what this experience we're having is and what it's about. And so because of those proclivities, I really started delving into trying to understand memory and long-term potentiation, a little bit of neuroanatomy, the hippocampus, limbic system, and trying to understand this crazy this crazy noodle that we have in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
So you just said something that surprises me, but that resonates with me. You're obviously very connected and social and verbal, but you just describe yourself as an introvert.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, as from one forced extrovert maybe to another, yeah, it's I can resonate with that. I mean, I was extremely shy in high school, and I had to push myself to get out. And part of what I did was just like study psychology and human nature, both to understand the externality, but also to sort of get over my introversion. Is that sort of, am I projecting, or is that
Yes.
your path also? Am I hearing?
Yeah. Let me give you kind of a really interesting, because from my perspective, I've been sort of in the public speaking area for my most of my career, and I got kind of kicked off with a bang back in the early 90s, because I became essentially a developer evangelist and a spokesperson for the Java programming language and
Mhm.
technology at Sun Microsystems. So I was on stage for events like Java One in the Moscone Center. There'd be like, you know, 15,000 developers all piled into a big giant room, and
Yeah.
but how does an introvert survive that kind of an environment?
Yeah.
I think what it has to do with, in my case, is I think from the get-go, if you're like when I grew up in Wisconsin,
Mhm.
and later we moved to Michigan, there weren't that many Japanese kids there. It's like me and my brother, and so in a way, like you start kind of sticking out early, and so I think because of that experience, in a way, I became kind of comfortable. One of the things that people experience when they're in public speaking is just this experience of separation. So, they experience this feeling that they're somehow being singled out or called out, or they're not part of the group anymore, And the thing that was interesting about my upbringing is it
Sorry,
really
is
led.
that a positive or negative thing, would you say?
It's I mean, it was negative at the time, but it's positive now, right? Which is that it makes me very comfortable with the idea that I'm not kind of in the safety of the group, right? That I'm just kind of like, okay, you're being singled out now, and at the time it was, being singled out, and maybe not in such a great way, but like, I think now I'm just kind of comfortable with it. And I think the thing that has done, career wise, is it's sort of enabled me to just be uh, myself more, because in a way you can just, at that point, you don't have to conform. You can pretty much be whatever, and people kind of have to accept whatever that is, because you've kind of given up on conformity because it was never really offered.
Interesting way of looking at it. One thing I did was start hosting events because I was so nervous in crowds that like attending a party was not great for me. But I hosted events because as the host, you always had an excuse to talk to someone and say, "How's it going? Is it okay? Are you enjoying yourself? All this other stuff." So it's like, and then the follow up to that was doing public speaking, and then with enough public speaking, it kind of switches from a nervous fraud experience to one where there's like a pleasant adrenaline rush, and it feels really good now. Like I love, obviously, getting up there and speaking, but the curve to get from the beginning to the here, I guess makes me really appreciate it. And I think everyone appreciates how you present yourself. You don't give off any kind of introvert or extra or outsider vibe. But I understand what you're saying. You're like your own autonomous unit at a certain point. So how did you get from neuroscience to Java? I mean, I feel like we skipped Exodus right there. So let's go back to that.
There's a pretty major exodus, actually. I would say that there are these two. It's interesting, right? Because I think probably the largest single influence on my life is my dad. And one of the things that he had in his head from the get-go is that we were all gonna go off and explore the wonders of science. My brother is working in biology. He's a microbiologist, and I was kind of planned to really go into the academic field and to really be a research person. But, it turned out that that didn't sit well with me. I wasn't really cut out to do that kind of research. It turns out that I'm just as excited to read about the latest research in Scientific American than I am to discover it myself. And, it's amazing to be the difference in the amount of work it takes to read about Nobel Prize winning research and to actually do that it sort of if you look at the sort of reward versus the the cost, it gets to be really kind of not worth it, so I get just as excited reading about the latest breakthroughs in science than I do generating them. So it's and you can read about like the work of hundreds of scientists, as opposed to just one, which would be yourself.
So how did your dad or your parents react to your epiphany that reading
Really
is more
badly. Really badly. I mean, my dad had a kind of funny life experience, which is that he was a kid during World War II in Japan, and obviously, as you know, in the Pacific Front, like Japan actually experienced attacks on the homeland, and so so that he experienced kind of bombing and all this kind of stuff. So he kind of had some sort of he was kind of not a man of many words, but he was also kind of had a existential fear, and so in a way, the way that he sort of survived is he left sort of the post-war Japan and got a United Nations scholarship to study in Canada, and eventually sort of got his PhD. And so in a way, the thing that was so interesting about him.
Sorry, let me make sure I got that straight. So he grew up in Japan. He was there
Yes.
during the war.
Yeah.
And here you are, Mr. Wisconsin. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. And so
Okay.
what happened was my dad basically, so after, so Japan was in really bad shape after the war. It was really bombed out, and the economy was not good, and there wasn't anything really left to do there. And so my dad basically left. He came to Canada, and it's this sort of super classical American immigration story. He actually had, I think he actually had $20 in his pocket or something like that, but his plane actually got laid over in Vancouver. He was on his way to Alberta, and basically he had to kind of spend all of that in order to kind of get a hotel because they were stuck there. And I think some nice lady gave him like $5 so he could eat, and so so he basically landed up in Canada with pretty much virtually nothing. He ended up he ended up doing menial labor, like digging ditches, at the same time as being a student, right? So, studying. And it's so interesting, all of these kind of sagas, because, my dad actually in undergrad went to Tokyo University, which is, the best, pretty well recognized. It's all, it's either Tokyo or Waseda in Japan. Like, though, that's the kind of like the Harvard and Yale or whatever it is, and so those are the two big wig schools, So he went to a very reputable school, but he obviously was poor I think his professor called him poor as a church mouse or something like that. But eventually he ended up in this really odd situation where he got a job in the cafeteria, and then he worked out a discount to his rent where he would feed his landlord, who was also his housemate. So, it was one of those
like bring home food. Okay, clever.
Yeah. And the food that he brought home,
very entrepreneurial, like you, actually.
Yeah, the food was kind of picked off of the other people's plates and stuff that hadn't gotten quite eaten as much, and so it was kind of scrappy. But he definitely forged his own path in the U.S. Eventually. So to make a long story short, there, like in some ways, in his mind and in his heart, like being on that path really was just deeply associated with survival, and stepping off of that path obviously had the opposite connotation for him. So, I think the idea of one of his sons leaving this path that was known to be safe was completely disruptive to his psyche, and I'm kind of narrating it because at the time he just freaked out, which is funny.
By the way, if you just if you look to me to the side, I'm rousting alumni speakers and interacting with people, telling them to join. So my ears are with you. My eyes may shift right, but
of course, no problem at all.
They're spread over global time zones, so it's
absolutely.
So okay, so Java, that's really interesting. I mean, you're one of the OGs, as I like to say.
It's a language that's kind of now turned into like a COBOL, right? Because it's less hip now. It's more than 25 years old, and it's taught in computer science classes.
It's a little harsh to say it's COBOL, but okay.
Well, it's not as hip as like Rust or like these kind of like new hipster languages.
No, but it's okay. It's all right. Well, interesting. So you seem to have a blend of technologist and business person, along with sort of investor. So there's technologist, there's operator, and then there's investor. Though, what was the first venture you were involved in?
Oh man, that was a disaster.
Well, actually, there's probably a lot to be learned there. You probably learned a lot, and you can probably share a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was definitely kind of, it's all about the school of hard knocks, so I came straight out of, so Sun Microsystems was a big deal during its heyday. Eventually it was acquired by Oracle in this kind of sad kind of end game type scenario, but it was a pretty big deal. And, I went through this very funny gate where I started, working with obviously independent software vendors and startups and, these little hipster companies working on Java software, because in a way, developer evangelism is platform marketing, it's developer marketing, and it really focuses on, you know, all the developers building on top of the platform, right? And so the thing that happened to me was, you know, when you focus on those developers, you end up also interfacing with venture capital, right? So at the time, Ted Schlein over at Kleiner Perkins actually jointly started a fund, a venture fund called the Java Fund, in conjunction with Sun Microsystems as its principal limited partner. Because it turns out that, like, you know, guys like Vinod Khosla were actually was actually a founder of Sun Microsystems. You know, so all of these kinds of these firms and these companies were all kind of twisted together. You know, Sun, of course, had Kleiner Perkins as a venture funder, so everything was all kind of like part of the family. You know, so we worked with you know, those guys over at Kleiner Perkins to set up this Java fund. You know,
Yeah,
and so I got.
Sorry, I got to interrupt 1 second. Did you ever read Bill Joy's Why the Future Doesn't Need Us?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Bill Joy, I worked pretty closely with Bill Joy both during the Java years, and he actually launched a product called Genie, which was kind of a dynamic network discovery protocol. So, you know, it was really all about devices kind of randomly talking to each other and, you know, forming this kind of instantaneous distributed network. It was really kind of hardcore distributed networking a little bit before it was cool. In some ways, that's kind of all predating and presaging some of the stuff that we're all talking about now in blockchain technology. But, like, you know, for at the time, there was definitely a lot of cool stuff. You know, so I got, you know, but he really has had a lot of interesting thoughts, and, you know, obviously the future doesn't need us is kind of a cautionary tale about technology, and very prescient, because
Just a bit.
technology. Yeah, because technology did not go the direction that we had in terms of high hopes during the early 90s. Like, you know, we really were, I had very starry eyes then. I was very enamored of the internet and the, you know, the beautiful prospects of connecting everyone and, you know, being able to talk about everything.
Yeah, no, I remember reading that. I remember reading, you know, the Ted Kaczynski Unabomber Manifesto, which was referenced in that article. And a lot of both have kind of come out and been true. I mean, especially the advent of AI. I feel like, you know, on one hand, everything moves faster than we expect. On the other hand, things seem to take time. I mean, that article has to come out of a solid 15 or 20 years ago at this point. But now, you know, there's an article a couple of days ago about it. An F-16 piloted by AI beat humans 10 out of 10 times. You know, and you start combining that with robotics and nanotech, it's like, you know, we're going to be in an exciting future. So I don't want to be on a total bummer note, but, you know, yeah, it's just, you mentioned Sun, and that occurred to me. So you kind of steering it back. So you hooked up with Kleiner Perkins. It was a fund that was investing in Java startups and applications. And that's where I hijacked the conversation.
No, absolutely. So my first business experience was pretty bad because, you know, I joined an obscure startup that actually was sort of super early SaaS software, right? And it, in a way, it kind of like predated. It was really kind of a SaaS version of something like SAP, you know, and so it was super early for that, you know. So I think I learned a lot about market timing. Right. But the other thing that I learned, which is a bit of a hard lesson, is, you know, I got, you know, a fancy title and I got a fancy, you know, everything. But the issue became that the company actually didn't have any cash. Right. So, you know, eventually I basically went out there, you know, and I learned kind of the hard way how to raise venture capital, you know, through trial and error. Right. So, you know, for about 9 months there, you know, I didn't have a salary. Luckily, you know, things at Sun had gone really well. And so, you know, obviously Sun stock had done really well. The options did well. So I was kind of, you know, pretty comfortable, but at the same time, you know, it was pretty
You're still
awkward.
looking for your personal cushion, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, correct.
You, like, you got the title to keep you warm at night, but you're dealing, you know, you're going into principle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Digging deep. So, you know, I think that, you know, I learned my lessons, you know, I learned the hard way about things like diligence, you know, and trying to understand better these companies and, you know, how they work and some of the, you know, because obviously I kind of went from the, you know, the frying pan into the fire type of a scenario, you know. So it's really very good hard knocks, and you know life is long, and you know
Yes.
the thing that I think is really important is that, like, you know, people tend to project kind of invulnerability or superiority, or you know they tend to project a lot of atmosphere of like this you know supremacy, you know. And I just feel like you know you get knocked around by life, and you know I don't think it does anyone any service to pretend that you don't, you know. So that's what I wanted to impart.
Yeah, I feel you. So how did that all, dare I ask, how did that all play out? And then what did you do next after that?
Yeah. So it actually ended up okay. Like I ended up raising like 5.25 million. You know, it was a good round, you know. But the thing that was interesting is obviously, you know, if since there were a bunch of fundamentally wrong things about the way that the company was being navigated, you know, including some of that stuff. But I would say that, like, you know, eventually you kind of learn, you know, you learn your lessons, you know. So for me though, I kind of got excited about the process, right? Which is really kind of the startup process, right? So the thing that was so great about, you know, the whole being part of the Java story is that, you know, actually, Tim Haley at Redpoint, a VC, he comes from the HR business, you know, and he basically said, you know, whenever a big star explodes in Silicon Valley, it just kind of scatters star stuff like all over the valley, right? And you know, that happened to Sun Microsystems, you know. And so I had like networks of people all over the place, you know, in really interesting locations. And so because of that, like I was able to kind of pretty much comfortably have a series of roles, you know, in Java and open source software companies, you know. And I eventually kind of fell into marketing, which was an interesting role to play in startups, you know. So I joined a bunch of startups, you know, had some limited, you know, hits, you know, I had some exits, and you know it's been kind of a career of maybe 25 years or so, kind of on the operating side, working on startups. So that kind of constitutes sort of the backbone of my startup company experience.
And then for some reason, I think of your blockchain genesis story as involving Evercoin as the first one. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, one of my open source software startups was a company called Hazelcast. And, you know, a lot of people probably use Hazelcast without knowing it. Like if you visit apple.com, you're using Hazelcast because, you know, it sits underneath a lot of high frequency and high throughput transaction processing systems, you know, and it's basically in-memory caching infrastructure technology written in Java. You know, and it does this kind of elastic clustering, which is kind of amazing, right? So what happens is that, you know, it's open source financial infrastructure. You boot up a bunch of nodes, the nodes automatically join the cluster, and then what happens is that the cluster starts synchronizing memory dynamically using a database replication protocol, you know, also called Hazelcast, right? And it deals with really complicated situations like so-called split brain, you know, where if you cut the network in half and then you rejoin the network has to actually arrive at consensus about what happened, you know, to the different sides of the network while the whole thing was split in half, right? And so, you know, the thing,
Is that named
so what
after
I,
DNS back in the day?
so this kind of thing that's really interesting is when you talk about in-memory transaction processing, open source financial infrastructure, and you start to think about this concept of like, you know, what is happening in a blockchain, you know, they actually tend to kind of be very similar. So what happened was that my co-founder, you know, the person who was actually the inventor of the Hazelcast technology, my co-founder, yeah, it was really he first encountered Bitcoin during the process of trying to write a NoSQL database from scratch. So he was trying to build a database, and what happened is that he actually saw a Google text ad for blockchain, and he just kept seeing blockchain because he kept like searching for things about database replication protocols.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and eventually, you know, he was building this sort of time series database, you know, and he eventually found Bitcoin, and his first reaction to Bitcoin was actually to build a node from scratch. So he basically kind of had the node, joined the network,
So
listened
he's the
to
kind
the
of guy that
messages.
does something the easy way, right?
Yeah, so his sleeves were
I'm being
rolled all the
sarcastic.
way up. Yeah,
Wow.
I rolled the sleeves all the way up. And then, so, you know, and obviously, if you think about what a Bitcoin node does, it basically listens to messages on the network, assumes that every single message is a lie, you know, and basically comes up with this really complicated participation in this hash race in order to like, you know, so he built a Bitcoin node from scratch, you know, as just as a throwaway, really, just as a kind of, I don't know what this is. I wonder what this is. So as soon as he figured out what it was, he got really excited about it. And, you know, he kind of dragged me into it. You know, he was like, hey, you got to check out this blockchain stuff. You know, we're going to do a company together. You know, and I was excited enough about it that, you know, I jumped in. And, you know, by that time I'd really grown to understand how to evaluate startup companies a lot better, you know, and in a way, the technical evaluation of the blockchain technology was very much kind of an if you say so type of a thing, right? For me, I was like, wow, if you like this, it must be really interesting. You know, so it's taken me, you know, years of kind of passively absorbing and chipping away at blockchain technology to kind of, you know, just actually get the level of understanding that he had pretty quickly. You know, so
You know, there's divide and conquer. So how did this exactly result in Evercoin, and what's the?
well, so the thing that was funny about this is that the first gut reaction was kind of like, oh, this is going to be big, we have to do something, right? So the first thing that we set up over there was we basically set up the exchange component, and the exchange component is really modeled after like a Shapeshift at the time, which is sort of this web-based exchange, right? But, you know, it turns out that, like, you know, being naive kind of West Coast technology people, you know, we really just thought, okay, well, this is an exchange and we're just going to run it, you know. But we started figuring out that there was actually more significant, you know, regulatory concerns in doing that, you know. And so eventually we became a FinCEN registered MSB. You know, we started filing SARs, and, you know, we basically did kind of the buttoned up route, you know, and because of that,
You're early for that level of compliance.
yeah, we definitely were ahead of Shapeshift and you know, going towards compliance, you know, because we really, you know, wanted to do things properly, you know, and so you know, we implemented you know, full KYC, which resulted in the mobile application, right? And so so now we have kind of a full kind of wallet experience. We have and we've added since then cold storage into the mobile wallet through a partner called YubiKey. And, you know, so we have a cold storage wallet. We have a kind of, you know, exchange that's built into the wallet, you know, so we have, you know, so that was kind of the evolution of the stack, right? But, you know, as it's so interesting because I feel like when you look at fintech, it's like the technology stuff is all West Coast and the financial side is all East Coast. And, you know, so it's a very interesting hybrid, I think.
Interesting comment. Huh. And then I guess your venture arm is Gummy Ventures. Am I saying that?
Yeah. So let me tell you about Gumi Crypto's capital, right? Which is, I had already founded this startup company with Talib, and so, you know, we worked together, and I got approached by someone who is the president of the Gumi US, and Gumi is actually originally a mobile gaming company. You
Yes.
know, and as with many mobile gaming companies, it throws off a lot of cash flow, right? So what has happened is my partner in Japan actually has, I think, 6 venture funds that invest in everything under the sun. But, you know, this is Gumi Cryptos is kind of novel because it's it's not an arm of the game company. It's actually an independent venture fund. And what happened was they approached me kind of midstream, and asked me if I was interested in joining, the partnership as a general partner, and, you know, I was really interested in venture capital since obviously since 25 years ago and the Java fund and all of this, and so I did sign on, but the thing that was interesting was that I was already working on, Evercoin. So, I think we made an agreement that I'd be able to, continue to work on it as well as, further develop the fund. So that's been the story behind that. So just to be clear, like Gumi Cryptos is a 30 million US dollar early stage venture fund focused on blockchain and cryptographic assets. So it's very much kind of financial services, whether decentralized or centralized. That's the focus, because the core thesis is really that the blockchain represents the internet of value and the ability to transfer value. So that's kind of how that evolved. And this is really kind of just amazing. It's been an amazing kind of twisty journey to get to this place. Just because life has a tendency of throwing curveballs.
Yeah, no doubt. Interesting. Is it? I just got a name drop. Is it Matsuru or Nogi that you know at Gumi?
Nogi, yes. Nogi is he's
Okay,
the
small
president
world.
of.
I did not realize it was that Gumi. So
Yeah, Nogi is the president of Gumi Americas, and he is a shining star in VR, in the virtual reality world.
yes.
He's absolutely ubiquitous in VR, and he actually was a principal in making hundreds of investments in the VR industry. So I think Gumi has been a very big staple participant, and Nogi is a world traveler and a speaker. So absolutely, that's our Gumi, and the thing that has
That's
been
big, my friend.
yeah, absolutely. So he
Wow.
was the one
Okay.
that recruited me because they were looking for a Silicon Valley based general partner. And, it's so interesting because I have, knowledge of Japanese culture. I have sufficient knowledge of the Japanese language. I'm very comfortable with it. So, for example, our investment committee meetings take place in Japanese, and I think that that's something that I'm able to kind of hang and deal with, which is nice, because so in a way, it's a nice, I guess, call it product market fit for me, because
Yeah.
I'm also able to represent a Japanese firm, in a Western context, since I've lived in the United States since I was born. Never lived outside of the United States except for maybe a couple summers in Japan, and so I'm very much kind of like able to represent the local culture with 30 years in Silicon Valley itself. So I think that's it.
Isn't that amazing? When you talk about life being a twisting road, I mean, those twists allowed you to pick up the elements that were uniquely fitting to this specific engagement at the very least. To be completely American yet able to operate in the Japanese language and cultural ecosystem, and have the technical background and also the business experience. I mean, that's like it would have been impossible to plan it in advance, but here it is and it works.
Yeah, impossible to plan in advance. Yeah, I think that the thing that's been so I can tell when I talk about like curveballs, actually one of the big curveballs that happened, almost 10 years ago, actually, is that my dad passed away, and I went through actually a pretty big struggle, right? But the thing that happened in this struggle was I had actually had a series of kind of demanding foreign kind of bosses that were all kind of like slightly like impatient and angry. Yeah, they were to me, they were all kind of in some ways modeled after my dad. Immigrants and like filled with energy, and they're immigrants from everywhere. They're from Australia, they were from Germany, they were from Turkey. But so they weren't Japanese, But the thing that was so interesting is that those were they're from India, and those were people that I kind of looked up to and was like, okay, these are my bosses, right? So I had this attitude toward the world where it was like, okay, I have to work for someone like that because that's who my boss is, And when my dad passed away, I went through a period of soul searching. It was a big blow for me. Him being probably one of the biggest influences on my whole life, and the thing that I ended up thinking is I ended up searching for like, well, who's my boss now? That was kind of my question. Whose approval am I seeking? Like, what am I doing with my life if not? And it's tough because when you get to middle age and you're still thinking about impressing your dad and you're still thinking about that kind of stuff. It's amazing that we're still, I was that maybe I hadn't, grown up completely, until some events just kind of shake you up like that, and so the thing that happened that was so transformational at that time was that, I began to realize that like that I kind of have two bosses. One of them is kind of my own nature, right? Which is my personal nature. It's like, well, who am I? Like, that's in some ways, whoever it is that I am is my boss, right? But I think the other dimension that's really important is that that nature itself is also my boss, right? That I have
Well,
to
how
kind
do you
of
tease out those two? I mean, Mr.
so
Neuroscience. How much of this?
So the thing that's fascinating is that the conclusion I came to is that if you really are fully expressing your own personal nature, then you become kind of a force of nature, right? You become sort of indistinguishable from nature itself, right? And so to me, obviously you have to be aware of like what the world is doing, right? So if you're aware of what the world is doing, right, that's what nature itself is doing, but how do you fit into that? And the way you fit into that is by doing whatever it is that you're meant to do or whatever it is that you're supposed to do, right? Which is you're supposed to express your own thing. Yeah, Marco in the chat says, you choose your boss every day, and that's beautiful, and that's really kind of where I arrived at some level, right? But I think that to me, the thing that unlocks the puzzle for me is this feeling that, like if you look at someone who's competing in the Olympics, right? Like it doesn't matter like what the field is. Let's say it's triple jump or something unusual, right? Like when you see an Olympian doing the triple jump, like everyone wants those athletes to perform well, and they're all kind of rooting for them and cheering for them, right? Because they're so clearly doing what they were meant to do, right? They're, like when you see someone who's competing at that level, like the two things that in your heart is when you see it, that they've been training their asses off, right? But you also know that you're seeing people with incredible talent for doing these things, whatever it is they're doing, right? And so to me, if you see someone who's kind of like working super hard, but also has unique talent in whatever it is, like the rest of the world kind of lines up behind that person, right? They're
Yes.
like, wow, like it's wild to see someone who's sort of in that state of self-actualization. And, I don't pretend to be that person. I don't pretend to be an Olympian, but, we all have to have aspiration, right? So, the aspiration is kind of like, wow, like, can someone really be themselves to that degree? Can they express their own nature to that degree? And then, to me, like part of interfacing with universal nature is to try to see what the world is doing and what the world is kind of offering, right? And to me, one of the things that got me excited about kind of blockchain and also Bitcoin is that, Bitcoin seems to be something that the world is doing on its own. Like and Bitcoin kind of seems to be doing itself, and so to me, when I look out there, I think this is astonishing, right? And it's a very beautiful natural extension of just open source software.
For sure, and you're right. It is force of nature, like in the sense that the market or the consortium or the network, whatever you want to call it, that's doing it, is so fractured into individual elements. It's nature-like, and then nature's really like that. Like this, no one seems to be specifically in charge of like how every rock moves, how every tree moves, and how every drop of water moves. But when it comes together, it forms something amazing. Interesting point. And I like how you align yourself. When you align your actions with your nature, you become a force of nature. That was a beautiful thing you said.
Yeah. So that's really been my kind of the thing that's driven me, since that. And the thing that's been true, like I talk about kind of hard knocks, right? And I think that this kind of talk is really important for today because everybody's getting beaten up today. I mean, it's a really difficult business environment. It's a really difficult world. It's a difficult medical environment. Like, our families are experiencing a lot of stress for various reasons. There's quarantine. There's, the thirst for racial justice and equality. There's so many dimensions to the struggles that people experience on a daily basis. So I think that the thing that's important to reflect on is kind of how we get sort of beat down, but when you think about getting beaten down by nature, it's also important to reflect on how that can potentially strengthen us, and obviously it's also, it also can weaken us, so we just have to kind of like, take our licks and see if we can learn something from it.
Yeah, and hopefully get stronger. So what I like to do now is bridge over towards a combination of things, bridge over to your present interest in decentralized finance, and also use that as an opportunity to bring in our alumni speakers, hopefully in like an ordered, structured way, unlike last time, which became like a bloodbath, because of, yeah, that was interesting. So let's lead off with you, of course. Tell us, obviously DeFi seems to be the hot trend right now and everyone's pouncing on it. Give us your take on it. What do you see your involvement as? What do you find interesting? And then we'll sort of open it up. So go ahead.
Yeah. So let me dig back all the way back to kind of my biological science roots, right? So, if you look at kind of the blockchain world, right? We talked a little bit briefly about Bitcoin, right? Which is sort of like the great grandparent, and in a sense, like Bitcoin is sort of sound money in itself is a killer application that's working just fine as intended, right? And so that's beautiful and a wonderful thing, right? But when you look at what's happened with the Ethereum blockchain, right? The thing that's so interesting is that the Ethereum blockchain is like a powder keg, right? Because what's happened is the Ethereum blockchain represents stored financial energy, but with a programmable platform sitting on top, right? So the thing that's exciting about what's happening in Ethereum is that, when you have that much energy, financial energy stored underneath, and then you have so much programmability sitting on top, like you shouldn't be surprised to find that the thing has kind of come to life, right? And so, this to me is kind of a natural evolution of that kind of energy plus structure, and the structures are starting to accommodate the energy and move the energy around, right? There's a wonderful physicist at MIT, Jeremy England, who says that if you shine a light on a random collection of atoms for long enough, you should not be surprised to find that the atoms have turned into a plant. Right. And he's talking about an evolutionary amount of time, right? But like,
no,
what does
I
that?
get it. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. What does that mean, right? The thing that's astonishing is it turns out that like energy actually plays with matter and structure. And in a sense, what energy does is it looks for stuff to do. Right. So the energy is like, well, what do I do? What do I do? And the thing that happened on the Earth is that the sun shone on the Earth for the better part of 4 billion years plus, and then the biosphere happened, and so what's happening is that obviously new structures are being created, but it's all dependent on the energy, right? The energy is the financial energy. And when you look at DeFi is really now structured after the idea that these organisms are trapping energy through this concept called TVL, which is total value locked. So at some level, a species is defined by the total amount of value that it's able to lock, just like in nature, right? Which is that, a species basically locks a certain amount of energy that you could measure in kilocalories, right? So if you look at the 8 now billion humans, that many humans locks a heck of a lot of energy, of biological energy, right? So it's similar what's happening in DeFi. So DeFi is now kind of experiencing its Cambrian evolution, where it's sort of in a period of explosive growth of new forms.
Interesting. And I have to point out that it's having these teething issues, whether it's yam or sushi or everything else. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I would say the thing that's so crazy about what's happening is that when you look at these food-based meme coins like Yam and Sushi, like what's happening is that we're seeing now this sort of, I guess, cybernetic interface between the programmability and kind of human behavior, right? And the thing that's so fascinating about the story of Yam, I have a YouTube channel, it's Miko.com/bits. This channel, actually, I describe a little bit about the sort of Yam apocalypse and the saga of Yam tokens, and I think that the thing that was fun about it was that it actually was sort of decentralized prematurely, and so Yam started just operating itself, right? And the thing that was so crazy is that it had bugs in it from the so if you think about it from the perspective of a life form, it's like a life form with killer mutations, right? So it's sort of born defective and just dies quickly, right? So the thing that happened with Yam that was amazing is that it first went through a catalyzing community drama, which is that Yam was a rebase token that kind of resets itself every, I think it was 24 hours, right? So the thing that was so fascinating about this is that the Yam token basically was destined to kind of reset. And the thing that was crazy was that the Yam team basically was like, oh, if we don't approve this governance proposal, Yam will become ungovernable at the next rebase period. So we have 24 hours as a community to come together and vote for this proposal. But it turns out that the mutations inside of Yam were so bad that even after the community all came together, they voted for Yam and it imploded anyway, right? So to me, the thing that happened that was crazy was that Yam was a governance drama, and it was basically like it turned into this meme thing of like Yam farmers all must form a government against this common enemy that was impending self-destruction.
Yeah.
Again, so they're uniting against a common foe. They're like sort of joining, to overcome their self-interest and become a team, and so this drama unfolded in front of everyone's eyes, a governance drama. And the thing that happened that was sad was that all the Yam farmers got together, they voted for the proposal, and the thing imploded anyway, because it turns out that there was another bug related to the improvement proposal process. So they even with the votes, they couldn't succeed, and the thing crashed, right? And so, but what happened after in the ashes was that they created a system called Yam2, and then they invited the Yam farmers to swap their old Yams, which were effectively dead, for these new Yams, right? And people just started doing that, and Yam started rolling forward. So to make a long story short about the Yam farming kind of Yam apocalypse is that, that is part of a process of learning. And in a way, Yam was a natural predecessor to something like Sushi, which is kind of known as this sort of vampiric kind of Uniswap clone, and what happens, just like in life, is that, there are parasitic concepts, right? So if you look at Sushi's basically Uniswap plus this kind of crazy weaponized kind of token mechanic that just sucks energy, right? And so if you look at biological nature, like, of course that's going to work, right? But the thing that's so interesting is that we're really seeing dramas, right? Because the pseudonymous creator of the sushi swap protocol, this person known as Nomi Chef, basically did some really shady looking things, which is that 10% of the tokens were actually being siphoned off to this thing called the developer fund, right? So it turns out that ended up being about $13 million worth of the sushi token. And what happened is that the pseudonymous creator, Nomi Chef, took all of the tokens and basically cashed them out through a system called Zapper, cashed them into Ether all at once, just bang, right? And took all the money basically. Now he argues that
I'm not sure that was wrong.
Yeah. That was his argument. His argument was I'm a developer. I developed sushi. That's the developer fund. That's my money. I'm taking it, right? So there's a huge debate about whether it was ethically wrong of him, but what ended up happening is it ended up creating this huge, upset, right? And what ended up happening is that, the chief sushi chef basically appointed a dude, SBF Alameda, who runs the FTX protocol, and basically said, okay, you're in charge. And as soon as that happened, SBF Alameda said, okay, well, let's have a community vote and see who holds the multi-sig for this so that we can recover, right? So what we're talking about is kind of when the technology breaks, then the governance has to take over. So all of these things are amazing learning experiences in the community.
Completely. So I want to bring on our alumni speakers, and some of them may or may not be in front of their computers right now. We'll figure this out. Andy, we're gonna start with A's. We're gonna start with Saunders, good buddies. We're either gonna do Andy or Alexis, depending on who chats me first.
Well, it'd be great to see Alexis.
Marco, and everyone's gonna come on, but Andy or Alexis, are you?
I came to Alexis's show in Bangkok.
Oh, amazing!
With Yellow, so it'd be great to see him again.
Yes. Well, the moment either one of them chats me, we'll be all set.
No problem.
Xavier looking fresh this morning. So Xavier, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Xavier Hawk.
Alexis is not joining.
Yeah, but so Alexis, you look beautiful. But we're on Xavier, but you look sharp. Xavier, good morning.
Good morning, Miko. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing some of your story. I think that you have a brilliant view on all of the different aspects of the ecosystem right now, especially like blockchain going to biology. That what you just said right now is what kind of like blew my mind. So thank you so much. I did put a question in the chat earlier when we were talking about Gumi and was saying, how do you navigate the messy world of valueless blockchain startups? You probably are looking at the team, and do you factor in whether it'll expand beyond the blockchain community, let's say?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So how do you navigate, so that really is the job of venture capital, right? So there's a bunch of really classic elements to it, so for me, if you look at something like the Sequoia slide template, there's 11 slides that kind of govern everything from sort of team to, financials, competition, market size, so everything you need to know. It's almost like a mini kind of business school lesson on kind of what matters, right? Because, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is conviction, right? And when you talk about early stage venture, really it becomes kind of a gut level personal thing, and the thing that's so funny about when we talk about gut is, we're not literally talking about, I don't think we're talking about the enteric nervous system as a processor, your brain, there is a gut brain, but it doesn't have enough neurons in it. What we're talking about is physiological signals coming from your gut that are detectable, inside of your brain, right? And so, if you have a queasy feeling in your gut, it just means that you're now tapping into kind of layers of processing that kind of tap into, really deeper sympathetic, parasympathetic, autonomic nervous system layers, right? So, it literally is kind of a gut process where you end up distilling a lot of information, but ideally, you tap into your whole brain, and you make a gut level decision, right? So at the end of the day, you're really navigating by, it is pattern matching, but it's not necessarily superficial pattern matching. I had this kind of joking concept of replacing VCs with an AI, right? And what the AI could do is look to see if the person had gone through Y Combinator and was wearing hipster shoes,
Right.
in which case write a check, right? Like that would be the VC algorithm, but
I would feel that algorithm horrible.
You're gonna fix the process, but you're just replicating the existing process.
Yeah, and there you go. And the thing that's beautiful about blockchain is that you don't even need to write checks. You can just automate the transfer of USDC, and that's increasingly becoming the currency of blockchain investment. These days now, like I had an entrepreneur that was like, I don't want to deal with this bank transfer thing. Can you just send, USDC
Right.
or USDT? So it's a funny world.
And the other thing that you had said that really keyed in was the fact that so many people come forth and are like, I am indestructible. And it's like, no, there are real world lessons that we have. And sometimes that vulnerability of being able to say, like, I had gone through this thing that was really challenging and really difficult, but this is what I learned from it, is very valuable. So when you're looking at a startup, and I think I got the answer already. It's almost like, let's get past the facade that everybody puts on, and what's the real story? What's really going on here?
Yeah, it's so true. And my parents come from like a Buddhist society and culture in Japan, and so I definitely take a page from that, which is, I don't think people escape trouble, like the world. And to me, like, if you look at the foundational nature of the world, there's always imperfection in implementation. So anything that's implemented has imperfections in it. There's never unlimited amounts of energy, whether it be financial energy or solar energy or human energy or attention, and then obviously there's always entropy. So things are constantly sort of falling apart, and so I think it's super important to be as real as possible and to acknowledge all of these things as much as possible, and so then the problem becomes incredibly a gut problem, right? Because, when people experience stress and trouble, the question becomes like, how do they deal with it, right? And obviously, different people deal with stress and trouble in different ways, but like the thing that's common is that like when these entities experience stress and trouble, how do people respond, right? And so that's kind of the magic unknown, right? Because in general, the thing that takes out these small companies is sort of founder problems, and everyone kind of folds or collapses in their own unique way. And sometimes when people are put under pressure, they somehow outperform, and that's something that is so complicated and hard to understand, and in a way, like that's part of the world of early stage startups is, but I agree with you with really trying to be as real and as honest as possible, and to try to kind of understand how founders deal with kind of honest conversations. Like, one of the things that's really important is, how do they treat kind of investors, and how do they treat business partners, when there's all kinds of pressures on them, and just even the process of relating to founders kind of gives you clues about like who they are and how they're going to be under pressure. One of my kind of sort of self-help genre classic favorites is Wayne Dyer, and he said something fascinating, which is when you squeeze an orange juice comes out. Right. And he's like, why is that? Right. So his answer to that was because that was what was inside of there all along. And
Right.
so what he says is, if you squeeze a human, just watch and see what comes out, right? What comes out of the human is whatever was already there. Right. So, it's not, there's no magic to it. Right. So, to me, part of it is really trying to understand what happens to people when you kind of pressurize them, because life has a natural tendency to pressurize people. I mean, these businesses are all hyper competitive. And if they're not competitive, then you're probably not doing something that people value, right? Because, so because of that, everyone's kind of put into this pressurized box, and the question becomes like, how do people deal with that, and how do people deal with those pressures? And, the preconditions for performing well are kind of things like the ability to have hard conversations, the ability to be honest and self-reflective, so all these qualities. And it's so funny and nonlinear, right? Because sometimes the opposite of those qualities are useful, right? So it becomes a bit of a puzzle box.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for answering my questions. And this has been a great talk, Gordon. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much.
Yep. Xavier, we're thrilled to have you, alumni speaker, join in. Alexis Yellow, the mic is yours. Go for it.
Small question. So I have two questions, actually. So one of the things that, hi, Miko. One of the things that really worries me is like when there was a DAO in Ethereum, like the original DAO, and everybody lost their Ether. And then, we had a fork and Ethereum Classic and all that drama. I'm seeing the same thing, I really resisted getting into DeFi for like over a year because, I'm saying this is so crazy, locking all this money into a smart contract. It's like so crazy. And I have been looking into solutions like, is there anybody doing decentralized custody? How can we fix this? Miko, how can we fix this?
I love what you're saying. I mean, it's super important. We actually have a couple investments in this domain, one that's unannounced, but another one is a company called Credo, Qredo. And what they're doing is really novel kind of MPC, multi-party compute solution. So they have kind of a novel Tendermint-based blockchain that performs multi-party compute on top of sort of a custody network, right? So it really is a fully decentralized, it's almost like a Fireblocks, but it's kind of fully decentralized, so that's exciting to me. But I feel like, we definitely need to develop important solutions around custody and how custody is being managed and optimized, right? But I think that your initial observations are really sound, right? Which is that this is a scary thing that's happening, and people are taking extraordinary risks in DeFi, and what we've seen with the kind of explosion of this is that like the demand for yield is sort of endless, right? But the thing that's so fascinating about watching this is that you're absolutely right to reference the DAO and the DAO hack, right? Because when you think about it, like let's take a look at something like Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi, right? So it turns out like let's say that malevolent owners start taking over the governance protocols, right? So for example, there's a tool called Power Pool that allows people to pool governance rights into voting power in exchange for monetary rewards, right? So now we're seeing this playing of governance power and economic power, and they're intermingled in a potentially toxic way, right? So if you look at the case study for that, like the EOS blockchain effectively suffered from a validator attack by Binance, because Binance actually separated their users' economic power from their voting power and started grabbing up block producers, right? So all of a sudden, all these like, block producers started popping up overnight, all of them with like Chinese names, right? And it turns out that that's all Binance, right? And so the thing that's fascinating is that if Wi-Fi gets commandeered through, let's say through Power Pool and some kind of malevolent super whales that basically now start voting themselves all the profits, right? Like all the profits should go to my personal wallet, right? Let's vote. I'm being extreme, like, that would be pretty hard to push through, but that becomes almost a governance 51% attack, right? But let's say that that's executed, right? So if that gets executed, all that's going to happen is that Andre Kranya is going to basically set up a ZFi, right? So he's just going to be like, I've just cloned the repo for Wi-Fi, and I have this thing called ZFi. And just like Vitalik did with Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, like he's basically like, I'm going to be on this
Miko,
side
I'm
of the.
going to show my ignorance. Can you explain that term, ZFi?
So ZFi is just a joke, right? Because the token that they have is Wi-Fi, right? And so I've just invented this fictitious token, right? But the thing that about the so-called ZFi is basically it would just be a brand new token, right? But all that would happen is it would be.
I'm sorry. Now I get it. I just wasn't quick enough. And again,
Yeah, no. It's totally like it makes sense, and I'm sure a lot of people were confused because I'm just introducing a neologism on the fly, right? But like so the creator Andre is a lot like so many figures that presaged him, like a Vitalik, right? So Vitalik says, I'm over here. This branch is going to be called Ethereum. We're going to call that Ethereum Classic, right? So like immutability fundamentalists are like, well, Ethereum Classic is Ethereum. Like your new thing is like not immutable. It's this bullshit thing. Like you just invented that and it's not honest and it's not real, right? So that did not work out for the Ethereum Classic purists, right? Like that whole thing was kind of like, but the reason why this isn't dictatorial and centralized is that it's all still driven by open source principles of consent, right? Which is that people have agency and they can consent to be wherever they want, right? And so if Andre Krania says like, okay, I'm gonna be over here and on the ZFi branch, anyone who wants to can come over here. And by the way, I will swap you one for one, Wi-Fi with ZFIs. So come over here and just join this network, and we'll all be successful together, right? And that's probably what would happen, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that, in some ways, I think this kind of almost moral leadership becomes kind of this last resort governance kind of mechanism, right? So I think leadership becomes interesting, and we're all starting to learn and play, right? So the Yam leadership became important, the sushi leadership became important. We haven't seen the Wi-Fi leadership. The Wi-Fi leadership has been incredibly important, but we haven't seen a crisis yet where it's been, forced to fork itself. But I think that may come, and so it's so interesting to see this interplay between kind of what the world of code. Right, because people say code is law. It's kind of not quite the case, and we still need human endeavor.
Again, Alexis, I think you had a follow-up question.
Actually, yeah. The more I hear, the more questions I have. So
okay, well, you got one more bite of the apple, and then we're going to Andy. But
okay.
Then we may circle back around after Marco also.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I think tomorrow we'll have a ZFi token somewhere. Somebody in the audience will launch it. No, but
that's a good idea.
No, seriously. So from the trading and investment perspective, you think this DeFi is just like a new ICO like bubble that's gonna burst, and or do you think this is really like because I see some projects that have the potential to really like kick the banksters out of the world, become the new, like decentralized, everybody can become a bank. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I'm first of all, it's gratifying to get the chance to connect with you again. But the second thing I want to say in response to your question is that I'm the guy that says everything is a bubble, Bitcoin's a bubble, and the universe is a bubble. The universe is like a almost 14 billion year long bubble, so I guess, is DeFi a bubble? Like I was the guy that on my channel created a video called DeFi will collapse, right? It's just a flat out certainty that it will collapse, right? But the point being that when, right? And the answer becomes like, it will collapse during a nonlinearity that we didn't predict, when too much risk is being absorbed and too much leverage is being applied, right? So, it's almost stupid for me to say that, but, the way I model when it will collapse is actually related to the extent to which the entire system resembles this complexity theory model called the self-organized criticality, right? Which is essentially when you're piling snow on top of the mountain, when do we get the big avalanche, right? So, to me, the thing that's so interesting becomes that these minor avalanches are actually really good news, right? The more small avalanches we have, the less likely there will be to have a big avalanche, right? So I think the thing that's so great is like we had like a Black Thursday MakerDAO unpegging. Recently, Maker just announced the DAI, sort of new DAI protocol that kind of actually helps, right? So now that we had this Ethereum local dip, right? For example, Wi-Fi vaults now have slightly different DAI incentivization mechanics, right? So what's happening is that the network is kind of experiencing stress tests, right? So to me, the more minor collapses we have, like things like the Yam apocalypse was actually great for DeFi, right? Because so to me, these minor collapses are great signs. Like if you don't have minor collapses, then you're definitely headed for a major collapse. Because every time we have a minor collapse, the network learns and it strengthens and improves, right? So this is a good one. Yeah, everyone should definitely study self-organized criticality. It's the work of a complexity theorist, Per Bach, and it's astonishingly valuable from an insight perspective in understanding how these nonlinear self-referential systems pile energy and how that energy kind of collapses, how it rises and how it collapses. It suggests that these systems either need to be linearized, you know, because real life doesn't model abstract systems perfectly, right? So you can't say like, oh, DeFi is a self-organized criticality. That's stupid, right? Of course it's not. It's because self-organized criticality is an abstract mathematical model. What you can say is you can say that at times it models an SOC and at other times it does not model an SOC, right? And the extent to which, you know, those things, you know, intersect is you know, I think it's important.
Wait, and Miko, I'm sorry, but before we lose you, Andy, I gotta get him on. So Andy, thank you.
Hey man, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
All right, great. Hi Miko, and hi to some of our friends here, Alexis, Sander, and gang. My take is almost the same as you. You know, everything is almost a bubble. So my question is fairly simple. Who do you think will be the next most dominant DeFi coin, or maybe put it in another way? Right now, Ethereum is the leader in DeFi. Will other coins or other main chain take over that position?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that.
How fast would that be?
I'm supposed to unfortunately jump on a panel imminently, so I've got a jet soon. But like to answer your question about the way I reason about this is I feel like we're looking at a tree. I feel like the trunk of the tree is Bitcoin. I feel like the cluster of branches emanating from that is Ethereum. And I feel like we're no longer in the mood of Ethereum killers. We're really in the mood of Ethereum helpers. So whether it be things like Polkadot or whether it be things like Cosmos, we're really talking about extending what's happening on Ethereum. Ethereum to me becomes a settlement layer. And so it doesn't require the kind of performance that everyone demands, because I think what will happen is that layer 2 will kind of take over. So I think that's the eventual state. So, you know, I obviously, if you're interested in like coins that I like, you know, considering it's not investment advice, you know, please jump on my show. It's, you know, miko.com/bits.
We endorse MikoBits, and we're gonna put it into this. We'll put it in the show notes.
That'd be great. So, you know, because I've interviewed so many great entrepreneurs there, you know, like Stani from Aave, you know, Kane Warwick from Synthetics, Kyle from BZRX. Like there's so many great DeFi entrepreneurs that have come onto my show. So, you know, please enjoy. So you can also find me at MikoBits on Twitter. And Miko.com is kind of the hub. So I gotta run, but you know, Gordon, as always, is super great pleasure. And you know, what a wonderful show you have.
Thank you so much. Thanks, of course, to my co-host Sander, and we'll post this on YouTube. And everyone else, other than Miko, stay with us for a moment because I want to be fair to Marco here. But Miko, thank you, appreciate it. Go Jet, join your panel, and we'll circle soon.
Sounds good.
Xavier, Alexis, Andy, just I'm going to make you the panel to respond to Marco. just because I'm going to improvise on the fly. And, you know, Marco's one of our alumni speakers and a very good guy. So Marco joined us.
Shit, man, you got me into work.
Yeah, man, you know, we're all working here. Marco's in the Caymans. Shirtless,
Yeah, I'm working all right.
Hey, guys. Since we are all online, you know, it's rumored that the sushi chef is a Singaporean. Have you all seen the news?
I saw that. That's very interesting. Tim Lewis looks like he's joining us also. Hey, Tim.
I heard he was Thai.
So,
No,
Tim,
they got a picture, man.
You had another panel, but we got such a good group of people here. I wanted to keep it rolling for a moment and give Marco the floor. So, Marco, pretend this is your panel. This is your panel. Throw a DeFi question at them.
I thought you were going to give a
I was.
Marco, speak.
Yeah, it's funny. The thing that I found. Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the thing I found interesting around this whole thing was we delved into the sort of biological nature of everything that humans do. Whether we like to admit it or not, much of what we do, as the minute it becomes something larger than a small group of people, it takes on its own kind of a biological life, you know, survival of the fittest kind of concept. And of course, parasitics are part of nature, and that's where all the scams come from. If there's free money / energy on the table, something will evolve to take it off the table. And that's where we get a lot of these things like the DAO, for example, where we had the guy found a flaw in the code and exploited it. Was he doing the wrong thing? If you believe code is law, then no. If you think it's not fair that somebody should be smart enough to figure that out, then that's a different story. But now we're talking Ayn Rand territory, which we're going to avoid. The thing I found interesting was about the governance takeover issues that we're facing. And it comes back to something that's near and dear to my heart, which is the idea that we have never really, if you think about it, even in traditional interchanges and transactional theory, had a solid method of accountability where we could drive accountability down to the point. And that's where we find most of our flaws. Fraud is largely based on the idea that you can't put your finger on a person and hold them accountable for their actions. So this comes down to the sort of the concept of a pan-global digital identity platform that allows you to have some kind of accountability without disclosing all of your personally identifiable information to the world. And I see that as being a way to avoid things like governance takeovers, because in the EOS example that Miko presented, where Binance all of a sudden found themselves holding on to a lot of EOS and decided they could just turn around and put that stake towards their own validator pool and effectively get to the point where they were in control of EOS simply through the deposits of their trading users. That changes when you find out that if you hold accountability, and you can see that happening instantly, that all of a sudden Binance is gaining all this control via its users rather than the users having that control directly. Whether or not you actually do anything about it is a sort of a commercial, social, governmental decision, but at least you now have a way to instantly see that that's coming. What do you all think about, from that perspective, of creating an accountability matrix for the world that goes down to the point, the individual, versus the current world where accountability is kind of amorphous?
Okay, so we're going to circle through the group. So, according to how they look on my screen, so Xavier, I see your virtual hand up.
Yeah. So that was actually the question or topic that I wanted to bring up with Miko. The idea of Ethereum and the DAO and even all of these DeFi extensions are really it's really scary to me, because there is no accountability. I mean, we look at Bitcoin and we say, oh, it's this decentralized system. But if you look at the main coders, for the blockchain, they all work for the same company and they are part of the same organization. And if you look at how easy it would be to do a 51% attack on the Bitcoin ecosystem, it's mostly miners in China, you know? So we're not as decentralized as we think, and it really does come down to accountability insofar as that X and Y and Z, these people are accountable for something. As much as we want to remove that, you know, and the idea of decentralization, you can't really, and there has to be an accountable, like there are people who are accountable to the Bitcoin world. They have no recourse. All of the users of Bitcoin, I mean, have no recourse to hold them accountable, but they are in their behaviors, right? In what their agency is over. So being able to properly identify, organize, and create a governance system that is sufficiently decentralized, yet with, you know, accountability is the way to go. And that's, you know, obviously that's near and dear to my heart as well as the progenitor of Firon. So that would be my answer to that.
Interesting. Tim, you had your physical hand up.
Sure, real hand up there. So two things. One, it was interesting. I was a part of the EOS takeover, and that was interesting. Again, these are all experiments still. This is where we're very much experimenting with decentralization and
right.
Byzantine fault tolerance. So I agree with you on the sentiment that, you know, again, Bitcoin is controlled primarily by three mining operations. It's not very decentralized. Ethereum's 75% of Ethereum runs on AWS, not very decentralized. There's different methods of kind of the accountability for what decentralization is. In EOS's case, DeFi totally attacked through the owners of you know, exchanges. I at the time I had been one of the top 21 block producers. I actually had helped stand up the network, and the moment that occurred was the moment that I realized that DeFi was just too prone to attack, and I really, you know, moved away from that network or that network design. It's useful for something on the bridge towards decentralization, but by no means do we have that question answered yet. And then getting to identification is going to be just a long step. You know, I'm excited that all this experimentation is going to come. You know, but you know, we still have so much work to do in all of what this is. I'm very happy that there is experimentation and all the things that are going on. You know, Bitcoin has been so great to understand and getting the concept of decentralization out. That, you know, what a great teacher that's been. You know, Ethereum has been a good movement forward, having a central figure. You know, like Bitcoin, it is a bit more decentralized. There's no central ominous godlike figure in Ethereum. There's a single point of failure. You know, since they removed Gavin, it's a single point of failure with Vitalik. But you know, I'm happy. We need to start getting more into identity and identity experimentation beyond you know, the 90s that brought us digital solutions like, you know, the one accounts from Hotmail and different Microsoft solutions that were going on. You know, these things hopefully with self-sovereign identities, DLS signatures, different things that people are working on now will bring this next phase. You know, but again, the real world is out there, and the real world generally isn't. You know, there's so much of the real world that isn't identified. I forget the numbers, but something like 30% or something like that has no identity at this point. But it'll be interesting to see if we can get people and move people on to sovereign identity systems that are useful. You know, it's really going to be about the ease of use for most users. Most users don't really understand. I mean, you know, I am guilty of this myself. I'm happy to click through with Google single sign-on. You know, but ultimately it will be nicer to have experimentation with usability and things like this moving forward. And I'm glad that we can all try to build networks that accomplish that.
Andy, or do you have a comment on accountability and how they build that in, and do you think this is going?
Well, I didn't get the whole conversation, but I did hear Marco's question about this digital identity. As most of you know, I'm very pro-government. I work alongside with a couple of governments in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrency adoption. We also help in terms of the regulations, and just to be real candid, today I had about close to 2 hours a phone call with one of the monetary authority in Asia. about very similar topics. But trust me, many of these government are still looking at the concept of putting all these things on a blockchain, or your identity on the blockchain, or the details on the blockchain, what should be on the blockchain and what should not be on the blockchain. I had this long conversation with Marco a couple of weeks ago about this. I think ideally that should be the case, but trust me, if we want to use this identity, data identity to catch the bad actors, I think this will not be a very efficient way to do it, because there's always ways for people to hide behind multiple identities to money laundry, to avoid AML detection and so forth and so on. So just to be real honest, I think we are still very far away from the very ideal situation where a lot of our profile can be kept in a decentralized manner. So it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible, because when you speak to the government, like in Singapore, our prime minister's medical records were being hacked.
Right.
And the information is available.
I didn't know that.
I'm very serious about it.
Andy,
Yes.
Andy, you and I should speak. I was the first guy in Singapore to bring a blockchain, and we started talking with the country of Singapore itself. So we should have a chat. That would be exciting.
You should.
Okay, go to the Alumni Speakers Telegram group. I want to see the action there.
All right. Thank you, guys.
When they see that.
Have a great one.
Okay.
Again, great episode.
I was just going to bring up a comment to your comment, Xavier, when you said that you talked about accountability and recourse. I don't see a difference. I see if you don't have recourse, there is no accountability.
That's exactly it. And all of these blockchain tokens that are part of people's offerings, there is no recourse for the investor against the company like you would if you're selling equity and things like that. It's ridiculous to me how much people have jumped into this, completely blind without understanding what they're getting into. And with that, I'll sign off, guys. Can't wait till the next one.
See you, man.
And I think we're gonna end on Alexis. I feel like I want to have you comment on this whole issue. And
yep. So governance is a thing for quite long. I think it was Socrates that was saying that do you really want to give? Do you really want to let the sheep tell the pastor where to go? So it's talking about democracy. And what I really liked about Bitcoin was that there was no governance. It was in math we trust. And that was a powerful concept. In math we trust. And people didn't have a choice anymore. Well, there was all these miners and stuff, but let's say you don't give the choice to the people if you want something that is going to be long lasting, because people are corruptible. They can go into clans. You see it in this TV shows. I can't remember the name, like Big Brother or something. They went into all these clans between the two. And this is what happens when you give the power to the people with governance. I'm all for in math we trust and governance. Maybe in the future we have DeFi governed by AI. That would be a thing. But yeah, that's my take on governance. But I do love governance tokens. They make me a lot of money.
Yeah, market inefficiencies are great profit opportunities.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said there. Despite what I said, Tim, I feel like a thought brewing behind that forehead of yours.
I mean, the governance showed itself. I mean, it didn't take that long for the miners to decide to make major changes, and then the arguments came between who really ran the code. Was it the developers or was it the miners? We still don't have truly decentralized, the Git repository, the actions and what's taken. Blockstream itself is guilty probably of kind of overtaking a lot of the governance for Bitcoin. I think to Andy's point, it really didn't matter when it was 50 cents or $1. But now that it's starting to become more valuable, that's when people start to get power hungry and try to take the reins themselves to steer more power to themselves. Maybe something will occur later that will be as efficient as electronic peer-to-peer currency that was idolized by Satoshi, and potentially not putting power too much into the centralized either developers or miners. I'm still hopeful that those type of things will eventually exist when we build out the rest of the systems, we get people comfortable with the ideas of what these are. I still believe that the breakthrough was the internet of money, and I do think that hopefully people will be able to kind of trade in whatever they feel comfortable with, and maybe there is base currency, maybe there's not base currency, but it'll be interesting to see different models, and I think the governance still is a core concept for how we enact and trade, and you have to have some sorts of recourse, I think, to enact and trade, or some sort of rules and rule set, and that has to be decided by the people that either are participants of it or that do create it. So there's a lot of governance and governance not modeling that does need to still occur. It's interesting. Will maybe eventually a truly ungoverned asset exist or be out? Will Bitcoin one day truly be decentralized? Will it break free from it? The miners that really do own such a large part of the governance of the network. All of these things are possible.
By the way, to me, it's a little bit sad that you even have to say that. Like, will Bitcoin ever actually be decentralized? I feel like my soul draining out when I hear that. Because
all of these things to happen and more in the future of Byzantine fault-tolerant networks. It's coming soon. I think everyone's working on it now. I'm glad that we continue in this community to talk about these things and to bring them up and discuss what decentralization is, discuss what governance is. I think that it is exposing so many people that hadn't thought about.
You bring up a very good. You bring up a really good point, Tim, and that is that most people think that cryptocurrencies in general are decentralized because the SEC has said so, or because the world says so. But the reality is, we all know, probably internally here, is that they aren't. They're just a little decentralized because you're still relying on the mining infrastructure, whether it's validators, validator pools, or miners, proof of work miners. They actually control everything. The nodes control everything, and the clients just decide which node infrastructure they prefer in terms of security and privacy and whatnot. Until we get to the point where you don't rely on the node infrastructure, you're always going to have some centralization.
I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but I'm going to call this show right now and say, good job, everyone. That's a provocative thought to leave us with, and that's something we can explore in subsequent shows, whether or not nodes are sort of these vestigial organs of early decentralization attempts, waiting for the next thing to happen. We'll see. I want to thank everyone for hanging out and continuing the conversation. I want to thank Miko in absentia for being our lead guest this morning. Sander, my good friend, do you want to land this plane safely? And
yeah, absolutely, Gordon. I fully agree. I think it's really good to see that we are not only getting really, really high quality guest speakers into a show, but also our alumni speakers and upcoming speakers are joining almost every week. We really appreciate that, and we will post the recording on our YouTube channel so we can spread it into our communities. We're looking forward to seeing all of you again next week with an exciting show. Appreciate all of you. So let's say, on behalf of myself and Gordon, thank you for this week. We wish you a good day.